Imperialism, what it is. It comes from the concept of empire. Probably many of you will think about Rome with images from various movies or video games. But what is the definition of an empire? It is something tremendously difficult to define, like defining the state. The easiest definition one can come up with is a country that acquires territory through military conquest. This definition, while simple, poses a problem. Most of the countries on Earth have conquered territories, yet not all were empires. So there is something more. A more academic definition, made by Marxist-influenced scholars, is a center that exploits its periphery. This definition is an accurate definition of colonial empires, but historically it is not true for all empires. The empire of Alexander the Great collapsed quickly, but the successor states, notably Egypt, carried out the legacy of the Greek Empire. The center of the Roman Empire moved from Italy to Greece with Constantine I, and knew many capitals through history. Sometimes an empire is defined by a country with many ethnic groups living under one political order, like Switzerland. The Ottoman Empire was proselyte. The Habsburg Empire was proselyte, but not all empires were proselyte. The German Empire was ethnocentric. So what makes an empire? An imperialism is two things. First, the relation with the universal. What in Latin it is called the Imperium Mundi, the world empire. The aim of the empire is global domination. As long as global domination is not reached, the purpose of the empire is not fulfilled. Knowing this, you can guess the main difficulty with any anti-imperialistic enterprise. Maintaining control and acquiring continuously new territories poses a serious logistical challenge. At one point, the empire's diplomatic, administrative, military, and economic might will reach the maximum of its capacities. The Wall of Hadrian was built at the zenith of the power of the Roman Empire. Soon after, the Roman Empire started its decadence and long downfall. When an empire has reached its logistical capacities, it will have no other choice but to stabilize its border. And this is a sign of the failure of the imperial project. The empire lives thanks to its glory and might. When the empire shows signs of weaknesses, when the empire is beaten militarily, the client states, the vassals, and the different people living in it will start to ask questions, and the collapse will follow. Many of us lived the collapse of an empire. The Soviet Union. The Red Army was beaten in Afghanistan. The Soviet economy was weak and could no longer sustain its possessions. Soon after, it collapses. The different client states rebel and depose the puppet regimes that rely mainly on the military protection of the Soviet Empire to stay in power. Large part of the Soviet territory seceded into new countries. This brings us to the second thing that makes imperialism. Once an empire collapses, its legacy survives and is reclaimed by the successor states. Since the Middle Age, many countries claim the imperial legacy of Rome, hence the domination over the Western world. The Frankish Empire, the Papacy, the First German Empire, Byzantium, the Habsburg, the Ottomans, Napoleonic France, just to name a few. In the East, the Chinese Empire, the Mongol Empire, and the Persian Empire collapsed several times and saw reunification wars among successor states. You may have heard of the Three Kingdoms period in China, especially if you played Dynasty Warriors, which was a period of successive wars to reunite China. For the European colonial empire, this legacy translated by an economic and cultural domination over the former colonial countries. Nowadays there is no country that officially calls itself empire. But does this mean that there is no imperial project? Not really. Imperialism does not require a formal empire to exist. When we talk about imperialism nowadays, chances are that one of these three countries come in mind. Russia and China always view themselves as empires. And now they seek to regain the power and influence they used to have in the past. But let's focus on the country that interests us, the United States. The idea of America as an empire came quite early, since George Washington described the country in 1783 as a rising empire and then as an infant empire. But the statement of the first president is not the only reference you can find. On the $1 bill you can find the Great Seal of the United States, a Freemason symbol. Under it, a banner with a Latin sentence, Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means the new order of the ages. It is a reference to a poem of the Latin poet Virgil. the great order of the ages born of flesh. And now justice returns, honored Saturn's reign. Now a new lineage is sent down from high heaven. For the Christians, these lines were a prophecy of the coming of the Christ. This is a messianic message. For a country claiming to be the harbinger of a new order of the ages is an imperialistic mindset. In 1812, during the war with Great Britain, Andrew Jackson, who later became the 7th president, spoke to his troops. Animated as they are by an ambition to rival the exploits of Rome, they will never prefer an inglorious loss, a supine inactivity, to the honorable toil of carrying the republican standard to the heights of Abraham. Again, we find a messianic and imperialistic reference to justify the deeds of war. Yet, this war was a failure. British colonial garrisons of Canada repelled the American invasion and burned the presidential palace in Washington, who later became the White House. So, another strategy was used. This is a report of an American spy working in Canada. In his report to the Department of State, he reported that he bribed officials into accepting a treaty of free trade with the USA and to voice support for the annexion of Canada by the USA. As you can see in his mind, free trade and annexion share the same goal. In another report made by the Council of the United States in Montreal, after the acceptation by Canada of the Free Trade Treaty, you can see that the goal of turning Canadian provinces into states of the Union is confirmed. If we look at the territorial expansion of the United States, we see that French Louisiana was bought in 1803, Florida was bought from Spain in 1819, part of Arizona was bought from Mexico in 1853, Alaska was bought from Russia in 1867, following the American-Spanish War, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and the island of Guam were bought from Spain. The same year, Hawaii was annexed after a free trade agreement. In 1917, the Virgin Islands were bought from Denmark. This is important because, unlike any other empire, the USA gained much of their territory through economic might rather than military might. Until 1945, USA were mainly interested in the American continent under the Monroe Doctrine and the Big Stick policy of Theodore Roosevelt. Unlike European powers at the time that directly controlled colonies, the United States used less obvious methods of domination, acquiring trade agreements with South American states and assuming control of large parts of their economy through multinational companies, United Food being the most famous one. These companies' activities gave birth to the expression Banana Republic. Every parallel with a nowadays company called Monsanto is a coincidence. There have been at least 28 US interventions in Latin America until this day, ranging from the support for coup d'etat to outright military interventions. After the Second World War and the ensuing Cold War, the United States were drawn into pursuing a more active role on the world stage. After the Cold War, the United States have reached a level of dominance and influence unmatched by any other country before. Facing with this situation, a simple question arises for American strategic thinkers. Everyone is probably familiar with Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State under Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. The fact that Hillary Clinton have listened to this advice during the primaries campaign have raised some protest by Bernie Sanders.
In her book and in this last debate, she talked about getting the approval or the support or the mentoring of Henry Kissinger. Now, I find it rather amazing because I happen to believe that Henry Kissinger was one of the most destructive secretaries of state in the modern history of this country. I am proud to say that Henry Kissinger is not my friend. I will not take advice from Henry Kissinger. And in fact, Kissinger's actions in Cambodia, when the United States bombed that country, overthrew Prince Sihanouk, created the instability for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge to come in, who then butchered some 3 million innocent people, one of the worst genocides in the history of the world. So count me in as somebody who will not be listening to Henry Kissinger.
Zbigniew Brzezinski, advisor to Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama, who consider him a mentor. Robert Strausz-Hupé, the least known, but the one who influenced all others, notably advisor under Richard Nixon. The simple question is, and Brzezinski formulated it in his book The Grand Chessboard, the United States holds the world by the four powers: military, technology, culture, and economic. what we must do for that to continue. In this, Robert Strausz-Hupé theories play an important role, the strategy of the Earthman versus the Oceanic power, which is an actualized version of the old British geopolitical strategy. The Oceanic power must, in order to ensure its security and domination, prevent by any means the domination of the continent by a land power. For the British it was preventing France, the Habsburg and later Germany dominating the rest of Europe. In the case of the United States, it is on another scale. The USA, as an oceanic power, must prevent the land power, the USSR, and Russia, achieving domination on Eurasia. Kissinger, Brzezinski, Huntington, and the neoconservatives have all different strategy and often opposing one. The neoconservatives, who were dominant during the Bush era, are evangelists of the market economy. Their main strategy is pushing aggressively for regime change, putting in place governments that are open to privatization, free trade, and corporate interest, thus creating a ruling class dominated by economic interests, in line with a globalization led by the United States. Yet not the United States as a real country, but the United States as an administrative entity in the service of the richest people on the planet, to say things simply. They care little for political culture and history. They have an individualistic view of the world. In their minds, it doesn't matter. These fine people want their fates pushed through non-pacific means. They will still want to buy Nike shoes and drink Coca-Cola. This vision is in total opposition with Huntington. Huntington is close to the paleoconservatives. For him, the world is divided between civilizational blocks that are inherently different, and trying to export liberal Western values into it is not only doomed to fail, but all his imperialist ventures also have the inconvenience of turning the USA, which he likes to be very wasp, into a multicultural society. His strategy is closer to the old British strategy of playing with the differences and rivalries of the local powers, to ensure that no one is capable of seriously challenging the USA. Kissinger and Brzezinski are more or less in between these two visions. It was under the counsel of Kissinger that Nixon went to China and opened diplomatic relationships, prevent the emergence of an Eurasian power. Russia and China must not become close allies, so playing one against another is a necessity. Yet, where Kissinger advocates for a more diplomatic strategy, Brzezinski advocates for a more forceful one. In his book, Strategic Vision, he said that the USA must put pressure on China by making them understand that the USA are the only protector of the world oil supplies. To ensure that the USA remains the dominant world powers, Brzezinski suggests that the USA should play the mediator in every world conflict, making the country an unavoidable party. This implies that conflicts should be created if necessary, which is also a view shared by Kissinger, but Kissinger is more cautious. Brzezinski was the mastermind behind the support of the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. He was always disposed to use Islamist groups to destabilize countries and never took them as a threat. It explains why the USA under Barack Obama were inclined to support the various Islamist groups in Syria against the uncollaborative government of Bashar al-Assad, as well as supporting the anti-Russian coup d'etat in Ukraine. In both cases, Kissinger was more cautious and reserved about this support. Yet both know that the current American dominance will end and that reform should be made. Unfortunately, they know that reforms will be unlikely. Brzezinski stated that the United States suffers the same problems than the Soviet Union. Its institutions cannot be reformed and its economy is decaying. So, what do you think? Will the USA be able to remain an imperial power? Or do you share Brzezinski's pessimism and think the United States will join the long list of failed imperial enterprise?